What if I told you that the death of America's greatest explorer is a lie? Today, on History's Mysteries, we look at America's greatest explorer, Meriwether Lewis. Now, if you don't know who Meriwether Lewis is, you've been living under a rock your whole life, and you need to do your research. But if you don't want to, then that's why I'm here. I'm going to give you a rundown right now. Meriwether Lewis was an explorer, soldier, and politician who was best known for his role as the leader of the Lewis and Clark expedition, also known as the Corps of Discovery, with William Clark. Their mission was to explore the territory of the Louisiana Purchase, establish trade with and sovereignty over the Indian nations near the Missouri River, and claim the Pacific Northwest and Oregon country for the United States before the European nations did. They also collected scientific data and information on the Indian nations. And when they returned in 1806, President Thomas Jefferson would appoint Lewis as governor of the Louisiana Territory. He would die of mysterious gunshot wounds and what everyone claimed was suicide in 1809. In this episode, I'm going to show you why the death of America's greatest explorer is a lie. Now, a little background on Meriwether Lewis. Lewis was born in Ivy, Virginia on August 18, 1774, 2 years before the United States would declare independence from England. Lewis had no formal education until he was 13 years of age, but during his time in Virginia, he enhanced his skills as a hunter and outdoorsman. He would often venture out in the middle of the night in the dead of winter with only his dog to go hunting. Even at an early age, he was interested in natural history, which would develop into a lifelong passion. His mother taught him how to gather wild herbs for medicinal purposes. It is even said Lewis knew how to speak Cherokee. In 1795, Lewis joined the United States Army. By 1800, he rose to the rank of captain and ended his service there in 1801. Among his commanding officers was William Clark, who would later become his companion in the Corps of Discovery. Lewis was appointed as secretary to the president by President Thomas Jefferson, whom he knew through a Virginia society there in Ivy. This man was the right-hand man to the president. He even lived in the White House and frequently met and talked with various prominent figures in politics, the arts, and other circles. He gathered information on the personnel and politics of the United States Army, which had seen an influx of federal officers as a result of midnight appointments made by outgoing President John Adams in 1801. When Thomas Jefferson began to plan for the expedition across the U.S. continent, he chose Meriwether Lewis to lead the expedition. I mean, that must be a pretty special thing, to be appointed to lead a major exploration by the President of the United States. Meriwether Lewis recruited his former commanding officer, William Clark, to share command of the expedition. The 2-year exploration by Lewis and Clark was the first transcontinental expedition to the Pacific coast by the United States. When they left Fort Mandan in North Dakota in April of 1805, they were accompanied by the 16-year-old Shoshone woman whom we all know famously as Sacagawea, the wife of French-Canadian fur trader Toussaint Charbonneau. The Corps of Discovery made contact with many Native Americans in the West and found them accustomed to dealing with European traders and other travelers. After crossing the Rocky Mountains, the expedition reached the Oregon country and the Pacific Ocean in November of 1805. They returned in 1806, bringing with them an immense amount of information about the region as well as numerous plant and animal specimens. They demonstrated the possibility of overland travel to the Pacific coast. The success of their journey helped to strengthen the American concept of manifest destiny, that the United States was destined to reach all across America from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. They would return to Washington in 1806. In 1807, Jefferson appointed him governor of the Louisiana Territory. He is now known as a hero, a celebrity, a rock star, a superstar because of his accomplishments. He has fame beyond all fame. Does this sound like someone that is about ready to commit suicide to you? On September 3rd, 1809, Lewis would set out for his ill-fated journey to Washington, D.C., where he had hoped to resolve issues regarding the denied payment of drafts he had drawn against the War Department while serving as the governor of Louisiana Territory, leaving him potentially in debt. Lewis carried his journals with him for delivery to his publisher. He intended to travel to Washington by ship from New Orleans, but changed his plans while floating down the Mississippi River from St. Louis. He disembarked and decided to instead make the journey to D.C. by going through the Natchez Trace, which was an old pioneer road between Natchez, Mississippi and Nashville, Tennessee. It was during this time that Lewis attempted suicide once, but was then restrained. Lewis would make his final stop at Grinder's Stand, an inn on the Natchez Trace in Tennessee on October 10th, 1809. After dinner, he retired to his one-room cabin. In the pre-dawn hours of October 11th, the innkeeper's wife, Priscilla Grinder, heard gunshots. Servants found Lewis's body badly injured from multiple gunshot wounds, one each to the head and gut. He bled out and died shortly after sunrise, his final words being, "I am too strong to die." Thomas Jefferson and some modern historians have generally accepted Lewis's death as a suicide. No one has actually seen or reported Lewis shooting himself. However, there are 3 inconsistent accounts attributed to Mrs. Grinder herself. Go figure. She was the last person to see Lewis, so of course she's going to be the one who's going to create all the stories. But, however, she left no written account or testimony. Some believe that her testimony was fabricated, however, while others point to it as proof of suicide. Mrs. Grinder claimed that Lewis was acting strange the night before his death, standing and pacing during dinner and talking to himself in the way one would speak to a lawyer, with his face very flushed. She continued to hear him talking to himself after he went to his room, and then at some point in the night she heard multiple gunshots, a scuffle, and someone calling for help. She claimed to be able to see Lewis through the slit in the door, crawling back to his room. However, she never explained why she didn't investigate further at the time. Another account claimed that the servants found Lewis in his cabin, wounded and bloody, with part of his skull gone. Which wouldn't have been possible for him to say his final words, "I'm too strong to die," because if he would have had part of his skull gone, he would have been dead anyways. The type of gun Lewis was carrying was state-of-the-art. This sucker was just, literally, it was state-of-the-art. So if Lewis would have shot himself in the head, he would have blown his brains out. In the last account, however, by Mrs. Grinder, 3 men followed Lewis up the Natchez Trace. He then pulled out his pistols and challenged them to a duel. In this account, Mrs. Grinder said that she heard voices and gunfire in Lewis's cabin about 1 a.m. She found the cabin empty and a large amount of gunpowder on the floor. Therefore, in this account, Lewis's body was found outside the cabin, which couldn't have been possible because we all know that Lewis was found in his cabin, in his room, the night of his death. So now we know that Mrs. Grinder is not a credible source because of the multiple and different stories that she told. So now what do? We look to the only other credible source, and that is the only doctor to examine Lewis's body 40 years after his death in 1848. The Tennessee State Commission was put in charge of locating Lewis's grave and erecting a monument over it, and when they opened Lewis's grave to make sure that the body in the grave was Meriwether Lewis, they wrote in their official report, "Though the impression had long prevailed that Lewis died by his own hands, it seems to be more probable that he died by the hands of an assassin." I'm going to repeat that. Though the impression had long prevailed that Lewis died by his own hands, it seems to be more probable that he died by the hands of an assassin. By the hands of an assassin? What? What? No one for almost 40 years can figure out if Lewis committed suicide or not, and then a doctor is brought out to make sure that the body in the grave they found was Meriwether Lewis, says that Lewis may have died by the hands of an assassin, and no one jumps on this? What, they just pass off as another coroner's report? And if I was the United States government, I finally found out that the greatest explorer in American history may have been murdered, I'd want to find out why, who did it, and what was their motive. And Tennessee's coroner's jury in 1996 recommended exhumation. However, since Lewis's gravesite is in a national monument, then you had to get permission of the National Park Service. And of course, they refused. Big surprise. Given a statement of possible disturbance to the bodies of more than 100 pioneers buried nearby. In 2008, the Department of the Interior approved the exhumation, but rescinded that decision in 2010 after the change in administration, stating that the decision is final. Why? Why? Why hinder a possible change in history? Why? An exhumation of Lewis's body could prove whether or not America's greatest explorer was murdered by an assassin. This could change history, folks. Why? Why stop this? You could literally change history by proving whether or not Lewis died by the hands of an assassin. I mean, this is groundbreaking. This could change history. This could prove that whether or not America's greatest explorer was murdered. And this would change everything we thought about Meriwether Lewis. This would change what we thought, that he committed suicide, that he was actually murdered instead. And that would garner a lot more respect for our fallen hero. A lot. This could garner national, worldwide history change. But the facts on the death of America's greatest explorer are not known. There are no eyewitnesses, and the reliability of people at Grinder's stand or in the vicinity of Lewis's room at the time of his death cannot be considered certain. This is a mystery that has never been solved and never probably will be solved. I mean, really, how can you go... this is what confuses me the most here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to tell you this. Why would you go off one account? And not just any account. The account of one of the owners of the inn. I mean, that's that old saying, your word against mine. But as I told you in the last episode about Billy the Kid, how the winner gets to write the story. Well, in this sense, it works. Because the only person to benefit from Lewis's death would be the person that Lewis replaced as governor of the Louisiana Territory, General James Wilkinson, who could have had a bone to pick with Lewis after being replaced as governor of the Louisiana Territory. He had the motive and a way to make it look like suicide. I mean, there had to have been some other kind of motive. I mean, getting replaced as governor, I mean, yeah, that's a major thing, being governor of the Louisiana Territory, but still, I mean, that still doesn't give you a reason for wanting the guy dead. Some people say that Lewis was carrying around a cipher that had information about General Wilkinson that would have totally... I mean, that would totally destroy his character. So, I mean, and General James Wilkinson had to have known this. So, that's another motive. So, now we have motive. We have the reason. And we have the way he can get away with it. Because Lewis had already tried to commit suicide before. But for years, Lewis's legacy was inaccurately assessed and somewhat tarnished by his alleged suicide. His contributions to science and the exploration of the West are always going to be considered legendary. But for now, I invite you to join me next time for more of history's mysteries. Thank you.